box on the side panel of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will make sure these are addressed in some way before our time is up. We will record today's webinar and post on our webinar webpage and VU Connect under Career Resources. We will share the recording also with you via email. I'm so excited to introduce our speaker, as she is one of our amazing alumni volunteers, Elizabeth Scutchfield. As a strategic talent management professional, Elizabeth brings a spirit of enthusiasm and collaboration to build powerful partnerships internally and externally. With the goal of releasing individual and collective potential, she has applied her talents in ideation, individualization, and adaptability to work in higher education, corporate healthcare, and marketing agencies. Always focused on launching new initiatives related to building high-performing organizations with a strong commitment to culture and people. She is currently focused on launching a consultancy, Cascade Collaborative, built around crafting communities, conversations, connections, and experiences to spark inspiration and insight with a touch of play. This afternoon's webinar will include some interactive questions, so please feel free to answer these questions in the chat or question box located in your options panel. I will monitor these answers and respond for you if our speaker does not see them. I now present Elizabeth Scutchfield.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being here, and I'm grateful for the first opportunity I've had to host a webinar. And I myself am a Vanderbilt alumni. I graduated from Peabody with a Master's in Higher Education Administration in 2009. Can't believe that's been 10 years ago now. And I'm really grateful to continue to stay connected to the Vanderbilt community and find ways to contribute. I love the story of actually how this webinar came into being, or how I ended up finding out about the opportunity to do this webinar, because it's a story of networking in itself, or the success stories of networking. So as Sarah Whitney shared, I went on a journey last spring to move into launching my own consulting practice of sorts, and was looking for opportunities to create conversations and facilitate, and had been pretty open with my network about that. And so somebody who I knew pretty well was Emily Clanton, who's actually the head of the Seattle Vanderbilt alumni chapter. And so she had connected with Sarah Whitney, who was looking for some recommendations for people who might be interested in hosting a webinar associated with the networking night. And I attended a Vanderbilt Opening Doors event this summer and got to connect there with Sarah Whitney. And she said, I heard that you might be interested in hosting a webinar with us. And so, when you set your intention and you put yourself out there and show up, doors open and you do create opportunities for yourself. So that's one of the things that I really like about networking. But during our time together today, we're going to explore a little bit of the perils and the opportunities that present itself with networking. I am by no means an expert on this topic, but I've had my own journey to trying to find ways to make this a positive experience for myself and other people. And I know that there's a lot of negative associations with networking. So I want to use this time to kind of reframe and, as the title says, take a curiosity and contribution-based approach to networking. Just so you know, in terms of the ways that I want to present, I want this to be conversational as much as possible. And I know webinar formats make that a little bit tricky, but as Sarah Whitney shared to your right, you will see that there should be an opportunity for you to post questions or post answers in the chat. So she'll help me kind of facilitate that and pull in kind of your feedback and your input about your experiences. I want this to feel like we're learning from everybody in the room. And I also use this as an opportunity to actually reconnect with a number of the people that I knew during my time at Vanderbilt. So I worked at Vanderbilt actually after I finished my graduate school program at the Career Center for 3 years. So I got to know students really well when I was in my graduate school experience, because I was a graduate assistant in the Commons, and I worked for residential education. So allowed me to really kind of get to know a number of the undergraduates, and then working at the Career Center, focused on the healthcare industry cluster. Also had the opportunity to get to know a number of really amazing people. So this webinar actually gave me the opportunity to reconnect with some of those people, draw in some of their experiences, and also kind of reconnect with what their journey has been since Vanderbilt. So we'll get the chance to kind of get to know a few alumni through the webinar today as well. So without further ado, one of the main reasons that we're hosting this webinar is to really prep people with the Vanderbilt Alumni Networking Night that's happening on November 7th. This is a really cool event, happens across the US and across the world, I believe. Is that right, Sarah Whitney?
Yes.
Yes. So if you're not already signed up, definitely look into whether there is an event happening in your city. One thing that I wanted to test the chat feature is actually, for those who are participating, take a moment and in the chat box, if you don't mind, typing where it is that you are calling in from. And so we can kind of get a sense of kind of the geographical diversity that's represented in the people who are here today for the webinar. And Sarah Whitney will be tracking that, sharing a little bit about
yeah, so we've got a lot. We've got Minneapolis, Orlando, Charlotte, Memphis, another Charlotte, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Seattle, and it started to slow down. So I'm going to throw in Nashville.
Woo.
There you go.
Good, I love it. So I spent a good amount of my time in Nashville after my grad school experience, and it's such a fun town. And I should also add that I now live in Seattle, Washington. So whoever's here in Seattle, shout out to you as well. All right, let's keep moving. So Sarah Whitney shared a little bit about myself, and so just a little bit about my career journey. I've done a variety of things since I finished my grad school experience. I did study higher ed administration and moved into career coaching for undergraduates. Got a little bit interested in the business world, so I drifted over and did recruiting and HR in both large corporate healthcare companies and more startup types of environments. And most recently, I was working at an organization called Code Fellows in Seattle, which is essentially one of the immersive software development training programs that's popped up to help career changers make that pivot into tech. Obviously, Seattle's a huge tech market. And my role there was more business development and partnership development, essentially. So I guess the connection that I have to the topic of networking is near and dear to my heart, because it's always been a part of my career, whether it was encouraging students at Vanderbilt to get out and do networking events, or myself when I was doing recruiting, trying to leverage my networks to try and find good candidates. And my most recent role doing business development, I was trying to develop meaningful relationships so that some of our students could get hired into companies in Seattle. So I've experimented myself with a lot of different networking modalities. I also run a lot of networking events, so I'm always trying to think of creative ways to facilitate more meaningful interactions at those events. And a lot of what I'm doing now through Cascara Collaborative is really about kind of how do you gather groups of people and create interesting interactions and conversations that allow people to interact and have a meaningful connection. But I most recently have landed as the head of product at a company called Refound. And Refound is based out of San Diego and is a leadership development consultancy that is really positioned to provide leadership development strategies for companies that are recognizing that there are some changes they need to make aligned with the future of work. And so what does that mean about how we rethink leadership and management and what people need to be equipped and prepared to do? So really cool opportunity to kind of shape the future of work, and that's a conversation that I'm really interested in continuing to be a part of. So a little bit about my background. So let's jump right in. So this is where there's going to be some opportunities for some people to kind of weigh in and share about their experiences. And I kind of want to from the beginning surface, if you're here at this webinar, it's likely that maybe you are looking for some help and some advisement about networking events, and there are, some hangups, right, that we all have about networking events. And so I wanted to allow people to drop in the chat box thoughts that they have about a negative experience with networking. Because ultimately, sometimes you have those negative experiences and it kind of makes you want to write it off. And we're kind of going to see how we can kind of work through that. So take a moment, if you would, and put your thoughts in the chat box. Sarah Whitney will help me with those. These images I kind of thought were fun in the sense that, when we were kids, it was really easy to know how to make friends. And one of the things I hear from people who are, graduating and going out into the workforce and embracing the joys of adulthood is that, wow, it's really a lot more difficult to make new friends when you're out in the real world. I have a demanding job, and when do you have time? And, putting yourself out there can take energy that you don't sometimes feel like you have. So I think it's good for us to channel that more playful spirit that we maybe had when we were kids, when we're thinking about networking. So love these images that are of children. So, when I think about some of the negative outcomes that could possibly happen from networking, I'm sorry, what Sarah Whitney is?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, I just heard some background noise. So, this top image on the right, this little boy is longingly looking out the window. And as you might feel at some networking events, you're thinking, gosh, I wish I was anywhere but here. And it's hard to be present. Sometimes you're wishing you were somewhere else where maybe you were with more people that you felt more familiar, more comfortable with. Perhaps, I've had this happen where I'll go to a networking event and I just want to leave early because maybe my anxiety gets the best of me. So maybe like this middle picture, you end up just running out the door and just kind of giving up partway through the event. Worst case scenario to me is, and in the corner here, we have a little boy who's crying. So hopefully you don't cry as a result of attending networking events, but sometimes you have interactions that just, you walk away feeling crunchy, or you feel like, that didn't make me feel that great about my experience or myself. And so I think those are the worst case scenarios, but I'd love to hear from you all. Sarah, Whitney, do we have anybody who shared a negative experience with networking in our chat box?
We do have some options. Okay, so we have getting caught talking to someone for basically the whole time and not being able to meet with others at the event.
Yep.
Events that felt like I was being set up to be sold to by various vendors. Interested in finding out how to help others network more successfully. No one wants to talk with you unless you have something for them. And when in career transition and different organizations hold networking events, people treat you like you're toxic for being in a career transition phase, especially if you are underemployed or unemployed. And then finally, whenever I've gone to something, it seems people already know each other and come in pairs or groups and not actually there to meet new people.
Gosh, those are all such good ones. And I resonate with all of those. I've experienced all of those myself. I myself was kind of in a transition spot as I was launching my consulting practice in this past year and showed up to a networking event, and I really had to do some good self-talk. A lot of this is to me about kind of coming in and really saying, I have something to add, I have value in being at this event, even if I'm not, actively employed. But I get that sometimes we get that feedback from other people that they're kind of maybe looking for connections that benefit them. And we'll definitely talk about exit strategies too, because if you interact with those people, it's totally fine to move on, but sometimes I think we don't know how to exit gracefully from those conversations. So that's part of what we'll talk about today. But love those answers and totally resonate with what you're sharing. So this was an opportunity, like I said, for me to kind of reconnect with some of the alumni that I had gotten to know in my work at Vanderbilt. And Fawn was a student that I worked with at the Career Center. He studied biology at Vanderbilt and ended up graduating and not necessarily having a job lined up, feeling a little bit like he was kind of behind. The Vanderbilt culture is often that you go to some of the career events in the fall and go ahead and have an offer lined up. So he was trying to seek counsel from the Career Center and kind of how to navigate that transition. And it was a really cool experience. He left an impression on me because I set him up with an alumni who was working at DaVita at the time, which is a healthcare company that does dialysis. And the alumni was willing to do a mock interview with him to help him get more skillful at interviewing. And from Fawn's perspective and from the alumni's perspective, there was a lot of room for improvement. And but Fawn walked away and really took that feedback to heart. And the alumni was very willing and courageous to be honest with him about some of the areas that he needed to kind of improve in his positioning himself. And Fawn ended up getting hired at HCA, where I was working at the time, doing more of a product analyst related role. And in the last year has decided to go back and get his MBA at Vanderbilt. So he just was in the process of looking for his internship between his first and second year of his MBA program. And so when I asked some of these alumni about some negative experiences they'd had or experiences where they felt like they kind of faltered, he had shared an experience, as you can see here, where basically he was having a conversation with somebody he really wanted to make a good impression on because he really wanted to work at their company. And he had prepared some questions. He kind of came in guns blazing and, touting kind of his credentials related to, I'm in an MBA program at a reputable school, and, asking some questions that were kind of, I think, took on a little bit of a probing tone. And he came across as trying to sound smart, I think, when he really actually felt kind of insecure about whether he knew that much about the discipline or the function that this person was in. And so, he shared that, that was a good learning experience for him. It didn't result in the opportunity which he had hoped. And he realized that, he really needed to think about the way he, analyze his tone, think about his enthusiasm in the conversation, and really bring maybe better questions that foster more human connection versus kind of trying to sound smart. So I love that as like an example of a networking situation gone wrong, but lessons learned nonetheless. All right, so we've talked about some negative experiences. All of those are valid, but I'd also like to draw upon some of the positive experiences people have had. And again, use the chat box if you can. Love to hear about one positive experience you've had with networking, where it felt good, maybe it resulted in a good outcome, maybe you had a good connection. What are the best case scenario when we go to networking events that might happen? So while you're doing that, I'll talk through these pictures, once again, playing on the child images. So you'll see here in the right top corner, right? Like best case scenario, maybe you have a few laughs. Maybe you actually enjoy yourself and have a conversation that has a little bit of levity, a little bit of humor, and have a good time. The second picture here, maybe you meet somebody that you actually learn something from. These two little girls are reading a book together. I often, really enjoy learning about people who are in different fields from me, and maybe, they've read an article that I haven't read, or they're tracking a trend that I haven't tracked. And so I love kind of going to those conversations, seeing, if there are opportunities for me to learn something. And then really the best case scenario, you walk away maybe with somebody that you're like, you're cool, I'd like to maybe hang out again. And maybe it turns into something more, a friendship or, a relationship that has some longevity beyond just the interaction at the event. So I feel like those are some of my thoughts on kind of what the best case scenario is, and the reason maybe that it would be worth attending a networking event. I know a lot of times people are going for professional reasons, but it's also great when you make a more human personal connection as well. So Sarah, Whitney, what do we have from the crowd in terms of positive experiences with networking?
Sure thing. So best situation includes an introduction with some mutual acquaintance, friend, create some immediate connection. That is the only one we have so far, so feel free to continue sending them in.
Great, yeah. So when somebody is willing to, maybe you've stated, a field you're interested in or a topic that you're interested in, and you're willing to help make an introduction, that's a really great kind of outcome of networking events. And as we know, right, our network expands as we tell people what we're interested in and see what introductions comes from there.
Oh, we got one more. Connect with another authentic person who wasn't seeking anything from me or bypassing me because I wasn't in a high status role, but had fun and a human connection with another stranger at an event that felt not included. So both helped another in a group that was cliquish.
Yeah, the word authenticity really resonates for me, and I definitely think that one of the things we're going to continue to explore in this webinar is, everybody needs to approach networking in a different way according to what feels authentic to them. Some people really love meeting multiple people. Some people would rather have a few different connections that are like more quality of interactions at an event. And so, figuring out kind of, some people really like to do research prior. Some people like to just show up and see what happens. So figuring out what feels right for you is really important. And ultimately, if you're being authentic, right, it will be more, it'll be easier to find those authentic connections with other people. And if you don't have an authentic connection, it's totally fine to walk away from an interaction and recognize that we're not going to have that kind of meaningful connection with everybody at an event. And totally fine. I think one of the things that I've continued to really work with on myself is just really trying to not take it so personally when I don't click with people, or maybe when you have that person you interact with who maybe is feels a little bit more transactional or seems like they're looking for whether you can help them. It's like, that's about them. It's not about me. And, I want to get something out of this event in terms of, have good connection, or, I want to meet people who, want to learn and are not just kind of trying to advance their own agenda. So totally fine to make your exit and kind of find other connections at the event. So that's great. Anything else before we move on, Sarah Whitney?
That was it.
Okay, great. So Jenny Randall shared a little bit about an experience that she'd had. And so I met Jenny actually in Seattle, and she's actually really involved with the Vanderbilt Alumni chapter here in Seattle, and is a more recent graduate. And I really admire her in the sense that she's come here and she's really just jumped in and found ways to be of service and try and make new connections through things like, hey, you know, I'll sign up to be the chapter lead for the Seattle Vanderbilt Alumni Association. She has a lot of experience in event management, so it also makes sense from that perspective. But so I actually got to meet her through Emily Clanton, who I had mentioned was the other person who's involved with the Vanderbilt Alumni chapter. And Emily had introduced us because Jenny was in a career transition, and based upon my interests, what I had shared with Emily, she said, you know, Jenny, you might benefit from talking to Elizabeth. She's also had a little bit of a non-traditional career path, and I think she would be able to encourage you in this moment when you're kind of trying to figure out what your next step is. So we had coffee, and I loved the energy she brought to the interaction and the ways in which she was so curious and just wanted to hear more about my story. And mostly, I think she just wanted to feel validated that, like, you know, having a non-traditional career path can work out, and you don't have to take a linear approach to your kind of career choices. And so anyways, really had a great connection with her, but I'm not surprised that her quote was related to this. So she shared, some of my favorite networking moments have been from introducing friends and colleagues who share similar interests or issues, but may work in totally different careers or industries, or when other people have done this for me. I've gained advice on project management and conflict resolution from engineers and teachers and everything in between. And it's wonderful to see the connections that can be made between people who may seem to have little else in common. And what I love about this is that sometimes you really do have to ask those questions to get beneath, you know, maybe initially you don't think you have a lot in common with somebody, but maybe there, you know, like is something, but you sometimes have to stick with the conversation to kind of navigate towards what that thing might be. But, you know, maybe you don't have as much in common, and maybe you just kind of learn something from somebody who's in a totally different industry or field. But you do kind of have to bring those questions to kind of uncover those things. And I think Jenny, you know, is really good at that. She kind of naturally, and some people are more natural at that than others, and that's okay. Great. So let's look at the numbers. We talked a little bit about like best case scenario, worst case scenario of a networking event. It's like, okay, you know, why do people go or not go to networking events? So interesting, I found a statistic that basically says 1 in 4 people do not network at all, which, you know, networking kind of has such a broad definition. You know, I guess when we think of networking, we think it's usually professional networking events. But, you know, certainly you could consider going and playing golf with, you know, a few people that you know, maybe more superficially networking, depending on kind of your definition of networking. But I think in the context of this, it means people just don't tend to go out to these types of events like the Vanderbilt Networking Night, or meetups maybe is another kind of traditional networking format. And, you know, like we surfaced earlier, you know, there's a lot of reasons not to go. You know, you might have those interactions that feel kind of crunchy, or come across those people who have kind of their own agenda, and it doesn't feel great. So I understand why people kind of avoid that. And yet we all know, or most of us know, that 85% of jobs are filled through a person's network. So the idea of kind of continuing to put yourself out there and nurture relationships and build new contacts is certainly going to benefit you professionally. And there are ways you can do that in an authentic way that doesn't actually, so you're not that person, right? You has your own agenda. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I can't help, I'm fascinated right now by, in our society, kind of the shift that's continuing to happen in terms of the ways that we continue to have these modern conveniences that are actually making us more isolated in our lives, whether that's remote work, having our entertainment delivered to us. You know, I live in Seattle, Amazon is king, and all of, you know, so many conveniences that we don't ever have to leave our house. But then I think we're going to wake up and kind of be like, oh gosh, what have we done? So, you know, 50% of Americans feel lonely or left out, and there are opportunities for us to, you know, get out and make new connections. But I think that one of the things I've noticed, and I have to push myself, is that I think we're losing some of our social agility with the ways in which, you know, it's like, if I haven't gone out and had a conversation with a stranger in, you know, a month or two, then I'm out of practice and I really don't want to do it. So one of the things I think is valuable about networking is that it really helps us work that muscle. And I don't know how many people on the line might be people who are trying to stay fit and like maybe on the CrossFit movement or have their own fitness routine, but in the same way that we have to kind of keep working those muscles in order to kind of stay fit and not get injured. I kind of feel like there's the same can be said for getting out and experiencing unfamiliar social situations is also a muscle that I think is really valuable to work, and will also benefit you greatly in your career if you're the person who's kind of doing that more, because there are a lot of people who aren't. And meanwhile, I think the last statistic is interesting. So those who spent 2+ hours on social media a day felt 2 times more socially isolated. So, sometimes we get this illusion that if we're online and connecting that we are, that human connection is being met. But the reality is nothing replaces that in-person exchange. So just encouraging us all to kind of get out there and stretch those muscles of social agility. All right, so how do you want to feel at networking events? We already heard from somebody that one of the things that they enjoyed about a positive experience was like they felt authentic and they had an authentic connection. So take a minute, if you wouldn't mind, and put your comments in the chat box. Love to hear from the audience. How do you want to feel at networking events? This little boy has a little heart here. So when I go to networking events, I want to feel connected. I want to feel confident. I want to feel ease. I want to feel relaxed. Those are some of the things for me that I personally want to feel. So sometimes I think it's helpful to kind of surface those things so we can be more intentional about when we approach those networking events, thinking about how we want to feel. Sarah, Whitney, do we have anything from the chat box?
We do. We've got at ease, energized and excited, authentic, confident, valued, engaged, if socializing and even work more remote. I should probably read this before I read out loud so you can understand it. Interesting, confident, friendly, purposeful, a natural, not forced encounter, feeling connected, not just around strangers, and not feeling just like a number or to fill a quota, but having a purpose at the event, an intention.
Yeah, I love all of those. Man, you guys got this. You don't need to. You're covered. Yeah, purposeful, connected, authentic, confident, ease. I love all of those. So, like, even I think there's a lot of power in everyone kind of naming that. So for those of you who are going to be attending the networking event coming up, I naturally think that you are going to experience that more because you've stated it out loud that that's how you want to experience the networking event itself, because you're going to be looking for that and you're going to foster that. So good for you for taking a moment to kind of think about what it is that you want to feel. So a little bit from Brad Lawrence is actually my cousin. So interestingly enough, we ended up being at Vanderbilt at the same time. He studied human organizational development, finished up in 2009. And like I said, I finished my master's in higher education administration in 2009. And so it was fun kind of sharing our Vanderbilt experience. And he's had a pretty successful career, but it was not without some bumps. He graduated right when the economic recession was at its peak. And, he'd been very successful as a student at Vanderbilt and gotten a lot of accolades. And yet when he graduated, he really had a hard time finding a job. And it was because the market was down. And, it's hard when, as many of you know, when you're fresh out of undergrad, you need somebody to kind of take a chance on you. And sometimes it can be hard to convince somebody to do that. So he struggled a little bit for a period of time, but ended up landing at a company called Alumni Health and was doing project management before he ended up deciding to get his MBA at Harvard, and has moved on to have a really successful career at LinkedIn and basically a sales related function. So I love his recommendation here about kind of how he's found that it's helpful to show up at networking events. So he shared, when I dropped the act about my interests and was just myself, whether at an event or just at work with someone I want to impress, I try to visualize talking to a friend or peer who I can truly be myself with and use the same tone and confidence. It's imperfect, but it can help me relax into my authentic self. So, I think that that's really a great point, right? So trying to do what we can to reduce those mental paradigms that we create around this ladder of like, this person's, more successful than me or has more seniority in their career. And sometimes that is actually kind of what creates the stress, is kind of the ladder that we create in our head. So kind of knowing, like, trying to more so approach, I'm on equal footing as these people, and I have equally as much to contribute as anybody else at this event, just because I have life experience. And you have very, varied interests, and, there's a lot of value that each of you have to bring to the event. So just a little pep talk there. Great. So then what gets in the way of this desired experience? We know how we want to feel. We want to feel authentic. We want to feel connected. We want to feel confident. But what gets in the way? So I want to take a moment for you all to, again, drop your experiences or thoughts in the chat box. I'd like to hear from you when, you have this idea of how you want to show up at networking events, how you want to feel, and, what are the things that prevent you from experiencing that? Whitney, do you have anything in the chat box?
We do. First off is social anxiety. Then we have fear, lack of self-confidence, being nervous and not knowing how to join a conversation that is already going on, not knowing which events to go to, low self-confidence, feeling overwhelmed, afraid of feeling boastful, and even a language can be a barrier.
Yeah, a lot of that's right, like the self-worth and the value that we think that we bring to the interaction. And I too, I struggle with anxiety myself. So I think that it's good that we're kind of talking about these things because it's real, and I think Brad actually shared something that was really helpful. And when I was asking for his help on this webinar, he was like, the reality is everybody feels awkward at networking events. So when I realized that everybody's kind of on the same playing field, then it kind of makes me feel a little bit like maybe less like I'm the weirdo for feeling like anxious or awkward. You all are sharing a lot of the same things. So it's likely that if you're feeling that way, other people are feeling that way too. And sometimes it helps me when I'm at networking events to realize that that's true and realize, like, oh, maybe I can actually be the one to help other people feel more comfortable versus coming in and hoping that somebody will make me feel more comfortable. So that's kind of another strategy that has helped me when I realize, other people are probably feeling anxious. And sometimes, again, maybe you find those people who are, a little bit more shy and you help draw them out, and that's your way of contributing versus having an interaction with somebody who maybe is more senior. Maybe that would be a more valuable interaction for you at a networking event. So John McMichael, I appreciated his point of view as well. So John and I went on a alternative winter break trip. I know ASB and the alternative winter break or summer or spring break culture is very large at Vanderbilt. So we might have some people on the call who did that in their time at Vanderbilt. And John's gone on. When he was in undergrad, it was pretty clear about what he wanted to do, and he created his own major in corporate finance and management, and has been in investment banking since he basically graduated, and is now an associate at Goldman Sachs. John impressed me in our experience with alternative winter break as just being kind of that quiet, confident person that you just kind of feel like you know who you are and you're not really going to let anybody rattle that. And so it was great to reach back out to him to hear a little bit about his perspective. So he definitely considers himself an introvert, and I know that networking events can sound like an introvert's nightmare. And so he shared, for me, I dread the speed dating nature of networking events that are created without some sort of thread that connects the participants. Most networking events feel like you dropped a bunch of individuals in a room with one goal of giving and taking as many business cards as possible. Does anybody resonate with what John is saying here? You can say in the chat box, yes.
Yes.
Okay, we got some resonance
here. Yes, we have several.
Yeah, right. So, and it is, you're in this room and you're like, who do I have something in common with? How do I find those people? And, how do I know the people who are here for the same reasons that I'm here? You do it is a little bit of a puzzle that you have to kind of configure, and there's a lot of room for anxiety around that. And so just want to validate, that's not uncommon. And so what we want to talk about is how do we overcome these obstacles? So Ashley was a student who was actually in my dorm when I was the graduate assistant director at Sutherland's in the Commons experience. And She was somebody who impressed me as somebody who was very poised, even as a freshman, and was very kind of focused. She wanted to be in healthcare management from an early point in her career or in her studies at Vanderbilt. And I really appreciate what she shared here, which is really the spirit of our webinar, right? Curiosity and contribution. How do we have that as our approach to networking? So she shared, as I've grown in my career, I found networking events to be bidirectional in nature. I would encourage others, regardless of their seniority, to be willing to think of how they can provide value to the conversation, whether it's by recommending an article, a book, reading, connecting someone to an opportunity, following up on LinkedIn with a thank you, or just by offering a different perspective to a discussion topic. And I love this, and I think that this is really the counter to a lot of what was shared around, like, sometimes I feel insecure, and really we kind of need to validate, like, I have something to contribute to the conversation, even if I'm not a senior director at some hugely reputable firm, but likely you've read a book or maybe had a travel experience or something in the last year that you're an interesting person. And I think we really sometimes just need to remember that and be prepared to think about what are the things that I can contribute to the conversation that might be interesting. And we all have connections that we can possibly share with each other at networking events. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So this is a quote that I love for the sake of this webinar. So curious people are interesting people. I wonder why that is. And it's by Maher, who's a comedian. And kind of there's like a little irony to this quote because he's asking a question itself. And that is really the basis of being a curious person, is that you want to kind of dig beneath the surface and understand kind of like what's going on beneath, what somebody is sharing. And knowing how to ask those questions that help you get beneath the surface is really kind of the important thing about how we approach networking events with more curiosity. So how do we shift towards curiosity and contribution-based networking? So this is kind of a 4-step process by which I think about the steps for creating curiosity and contribution-based networking. So 1, set your intentions. We talked about, I want to be purposeful, right? And already you guys have said how you want to feel in a networking event. So we'll talk a little bit more about, do you have a goal with which you're trying to fulfill, either related to the networking event or just in general in your life, so that you have a clear idea about what you're trying to gain from participating. And that's not selfish, it's intentional, right? So, and we can show up in ways where we're thoughtful and conscious and not the person who's making other people feel diminished at a networking event. Secondary is defining your areas of interest. So what are the things that you're like excited to talk about? People like talking to people who are like have interests of their own, and like interested people are interesting. And so, it's good for us to kind of be thoughtful about what are our areas of interest. Go ahead and thinking about what are those curiosity-based questions that you can just basically have in your back pocket that will help you further the conversation. And if you're in a conversation with somebody where you're having a hard time making a connection, that's totally fine. It's really, let's plan our exit strategy, knowing how to kind of step away from certain conversations when there is less of a connection, or maybe when it is somebody that you're having a little bit of an adverse reaction to for whatever reason. Totally fine to kind of exit, and then again, be like, I know why I'm here, and I don't know that this interaction is actually aligned with that, so I'm going to exit and then find maybe another interaction where there is more alignment with kind of why I'm here. So we're actually going to skip these case studies in the interest of time because we're at 10:40. So we're going to jump right into these, digging in a little bit deeper to these. So set your intention. So this is really, what is your desired outcome attending the event? Is there a goal you currently have that attending this event could help you with? And what do you want to walk away with? So some examples of this might be, you're new to the city and you're trying to make new contacts. I attended the Vanderbilt Networking event 2 years ago when I had moved to Seattle, and it was just a great opportunity. When I moved to Seattle, I was like, oh man, I really want to take advantage of the fact that there's this huge network of Vanderbilt alumni who are here, and that's a great jumping off point for me to just make some initial contacts, and like, who knows where those relationships will go, but this is a community that I can affiliate myself with, and that was really a great way for me to feel a sense of belonging and community, even when I was, however many miles away from where I'm from, where I'd moved from, which is Nashville. Maybe you're looking to try and find a new job in your field, and that's your motivation, or maybe you're looking to make a career pivot but not sure what direction. So I want you guys to take a moment. I should have encouraged you at the beginning to write down, if you have a piece of paper, or maybe make a note in your phone, what is your desired outcome for the upcoming Vanderbilt Networking Night for those of you who are looking to attend? And feel free to go ahead and drop your answer to that in the chat box if you wouldn't mind. Sarah Whitney, do we have anything in the chat box?
Yes. Make new contacts. Find other quality people and opportunities for a career pivot. To meet other Vandy grads in town and try to set up a bigger community. New to the city, would like to make more contacts and friends. Get a better understanding of needs and wants of Vandy alumni and other cities to help our planning efforts.
Great. Those are all a good day. Oh, do you have one more?
I think that is it.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. So it's just good to know kind of what we're hoping we might gain from participating, right? So setting your intention is the first kind of step. So then defining your areas of interest. So what is it you want to discuss? What topics are sparking your own curiosity? And what does that mean about what you might be able to contribute to the conversation? So some examples of some things you might think through that you could bring to the conversation. So is there a goal you're currently pursuing? Maybe you're training for a half marathon, or maybe you have decided to do yoga teacher training, or maybe you have set out a goal to go back and get your graduate degree. So thinking about kind of, is there a goal you're pursuing that you could possibly bring to the conversation? Is there a side project or a hobby you're pursuing that's you're enjoying or finding interesting? Maybe you are developing a new dance choreography routine for a dance studio. That's very random. So thinking about a side project or hobby you're pursuing, or is there a challenge you're tackling that you might want feedback or advice about? I think one of the things, I really enjoyed reading a book called Give and Take, which was written by Adam Grant. I'm not sure if we have any Adam Grant fans in the audience, but he's written a number of books, including originals, and he wrote Plan B with Sheryl Sandberg. And he wrote this book that was basically kind of about, how do you basically be more generous in the way that you approach networking, and that actually really is a better benefit to your career than being more of a taker. He calls kind of givers and takers, don't give and take. But one of the things that he found in the book that I found super interesting, there was a study that was done among students at Penn at the MBA school, where they initially were asked, how likely do you think your peers will be to basically kind of be generous? And they rated their peers very low. And then they were like, how likely would you be to basically kind of like answer somebody's request for help or something like that? And they rated themselves really high. So strangely, we actually, I guess as humans, have this psychology that like, oh, we don't ask for help because we assume that people won't help us, but we're also really excited and willing and often like want people to ask us for help because it helps us feel like we have a sense of purpose. We all want that. And so I think it's good to think about going into these events, that's great. Come in and like, maybe there's something that you need advice on or you'd like feedback about. Maybe you have a startup idea that's kind of bubbling and you want somebody to kind of bounce that idea around with, or again, some of you mentioned that I'm like looking for a career pivot. So, ask people, like I'm thinking about this field, to make a career pivot, and, like, do you know much about that field, or, is there advice you have for me to kind of make that pivot? So it's great to kind of think about that. So I want you to write down, if you don't mind, and then also drop in the chat box, what is one area of interest or curiosity, or this could be even, again, like a podcast you've listened to, a book you've read, that you're excited to possibly see about bringing into the conversation at Vanderbilt Networking Night. Do we have anything in the chat box, Sarah Whitney?
Not yet. I think we're thinking hard on what our suggestion will be.
This is a deeper question, maybe. So I understand that it's sometimes a little bit hard to think on the spot.
We got our first one, structuring philanthropic interest for the future.
Interesting.
Yes, working on a new idea for a mental health startup.
Ooh, cool.
Obtaining new book recommendations from diverse people.
That's a great one. That's a great question to bring to the conversation. What's a book that you've read recently that has kind of sparked your interest and getting your book recommendation list? I love that.
That might be all we have right now, but those are great ones.
Those are great ones. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. All right. So then what are the curiosity-based questions that we can bring to the conversation, right? So people often share, the standard questions we ask, right, to start the conversation. What did you study at Vanderbilt? When did you graduate? What part of town do you live in? What do you do for work? And, those can be great conversation or questions to get the conversation started, but how do you get beneath the surface of some of those things? And how do you get to those places where you're like, hey, what's a project you're working on that you're excited about, right? Because other people are excited about some aspect of their life and they're trying to figure out some way to probably be able to bring that into the conversation. So it's for us to kind of figure out how can we draw that out of people. So what questions can help you go beyond the small talk, and what questions can help you, what you can rely on to further the conversation? Because sometimes it's about, I find myself when somebody shares and I'm like, okay, it feels like we hit a little bit of a dead end, and I have to think about what is a question that I can give that person permission to actually share at a deeper level about that thing. Because sometimes people they're self-conscious themselves and they're like, I feel self-conscious talking about myself. And so we have to demonstrate that interest and curiosity so they feel safe, right? Like sharing at a deeper level about something. So somebody's like, hey, I'm working on this mental health project, and they kind of stop there, right? You're like, oh, tell me more about that. So here's some examples, like basically the questions you ask yourself of what's interesting about you that you want to bring to the conversation. Just flip those and ask those of the people. So what's a side project or a hobby you're pursuing? What is a goal you're currently pursuing? And how can I help you or support you, right? So, or what kind of support or help are you looking for related to that, so that you can then think about your network or your resources that you have access to and see if there's something that you might suggest to that individual. So, and then these are just some great follow-up questions when you're finding that people maybe are kind of giving you shorter answers. So that's interesting. Can you tell me more about X, Y, or Z? What do you think about blah, whatever the thing is? And how did you get interested in, project management, or how did you get interested in, finance? I think those are great things that really help people realize that, like, oh, this person is genuinely interested in me, and I can actually, talk a little bit more about the things that I'm excited about. So these are just some ways in which you can think about questions you might bring that will help you get beneath the surface. So these were, as I mentioned, I solicited kind of various feedback from different alumni, and these are some of the questions that came out of what I asked. What questions do you rely on at networking events to kind of help you navigate conversations and have more meaningful conversations? And I love so many of these, and some of these are a little bit more professional. Some of them kind of have some range to them, so it could kind of go personal or professional. But what brings you out tonight is like always one of my fail-safe when I go to like unfamiliar networking events. People are always there for their own reason, right? So you're kind of getting to surface like what's your goal in attending. So what's your story? I love that one because that is so open-ended that people can kind of go, like, some people love talking about what they do professionally. Some people do not want to talk about what they do professionally at all. And so if you go there, like, people can kind of interpret that in whatever way. How did you end up in your current job or field? Is that what you thought you'd be doing when you graduated? What are some of the top skills you utilize at your job? What have been some of your favorite moments working at firm A, and why? Fawn actually shared that one, and I like that one a lot. What are you excited about in the next few months? Do you have any trips coming up in the next year? It's always fun to talk about vacations. And what professional meetups or associations are you involved with, if any? I really like asking that question if it's somebody who's more senior to me and it's a relationship that I'd like to like nurture, but know that they probably have a busy schedule. I recognize that maybe like, oh, maybe I can attend some of the networking events that they attend to continue to cross paths with this person and nurture this relationship if maybe they're not going to be as available for a follow-up coffee or a drink. Great. So I think this is where often we actually have the most difficulty, is planning our exit strategy. So how do you make that graceful exit? And maybe the conversation's going great, and yet you're wanting to meet more people at the event, or maybe the conversation is not going so great and you're like, get me out of here. So we all need to have kind of those tips or tricks to kind of be able to gracefully exit. And then also think about, as we close out any interaction, what are we willing to share in terms of resources or contacts, or what is going to be the way what degree do we want to keep that relationship going? So I appreciate this as like some actual like quotes. Feel free to write these down if they're helpful. So if it's a strong connection, perhaps you say, I got to head out, or, I'm going to, go catch have another drink, or, I'm going to go talk to my other friend. But I'd love to continue the conversation. Do you mind sharing your contact info? And we can find a time for a follow-up. So that's a great way, right? Like keep the relationship going if you really hit it off with somebody. Maybe it was a moderate connection and you're like, I don't know that I necessarily have any reason to continue to see this person in a dedicated way, but I really, they're cool. Like I want to like leave a positive impression and kind of send them off with good energy. So it's fine to just say, it's great speaking with you. If I don't run into you later, I hope to see you at another event soon. It's another kind of easy way to kind of exit the conversation. So little connection, maybe this is the situation where you're just kind of like, okay, I really, there's not really much here to work with. So it's fine to say, it's wonderful to meet you. I'm going to go mingle some more. Enjoy the rest of the event. I don't want to take up your time. It was great chatting with you. So that's kind of a way to kind of make it a little bit more about them. I'm going to go grab another drink, but it was fantastic to meet you. So those are, just some examples of some ways that you can kind of exit gracefully. And then really across these connections, I encourage you again in the spirit of contribution. So based on what you shared, I'd love to introduce you to someone, present or not. Is that something you're open to? So let's be generous with our networks, right? And the access that we have to certain people who might be able to support the goals or objectives of other people who are at the event. I'm a big believer in, I guess, like karma of sorts, and that, you put that generous energy out there, it's going to come back to you. And the other one is, obviously, I really enjoyed our connection. Do you mind if we connect on LinkedIn? So even for those looser connections that you make, it's really valuable to continue to kind of add to your professional network. And that can be a way, if you don't necessarily exchange, business contact information or email, that you can just stay, connected to that person. Great. So then, closing quotes. So it's important to surround yourself with good people, interesting people, young ideas, go places, learn new stuff, look at the world with wonder, and don't be tired about it. So, I know it can be easy maybe to get a little jaded about networking events, but as I shared, like everybody has their stories of maybe some flops or some experiences that are negative, but let's just have that resilience to kind of recognize, like that interaction maybe didn't go that well, but it's okay. I'm not going to take it personally. And there are, opportunities for me to continue to put myself out there, and there are interesting people, and I just kind of have to have patience with the process. I used to coach people at my previous job at Code Fellows. People were making that career transition. They didn't have a network in tech, and so they really did need to get out there and be willing to attend networking events and build new connections. And one of the things that I saw that they would do is they would just like go to a networking event and be like, I didn't make any meaningful connections, and they just give up and never like kind of go back again. And sometimes we need to realize like, I just need to consistently show up to something, and it will get easier and better. And then that familiarity also ends up building, somebody will be like, hey, I've seen you here a few times. So sometimes we need to kind of recognize that it's not always going to be like daisies and roses, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing and that it won't get easier with time. And that, building community and building connections, we kind of have that immediate gratification thing, going back to that convenience thing. And really, when it comes to networking, it's a dangerous thing to kind of, right, have that immediate gratification attitude when we're bringing it to the exchanges that we have. So what's one thing that you intend to do to bring more curiosity and contribution to Vanderbilt Networking Night? I'd love to hear in the chat box. This is kind of our closing question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. But love to hear anything that kind of stuck out to you or resonated, or anything that kind of you're thinking about differently in the ways that you're going to approach the Vanderbilt Networking Night.
All right, so we have come in with more intentions and goals to see how I can help others connect within my own network. The exit strategy slide was very helpful. focus more on the other person than how I'm feeling in this event.
Great. You're excellent.
And one more.
Great.
To be prepared with conversation starters and make the other person feel positive.
Yay. Okay, well, I feel like I'm sharing my email address in my next slide. So I'd love to hear if anybody is interested or willing. And if you apply these things, send me a note. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of attempts that you've made. I think adult life, we often think about, especially when we come out of high performance environments like Vanderbilt, it's like we have this perfectionistic spirit and, go into the event and try something new, try something different and see how it works. And then let me know. There's no harm in trying out a new tactic or a new tip and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And you'll continue to find your own authentic way to show up at networking events that aligns with your goals and allows you to be authentic. And I look forward to hearing about how this experience gives you that opportunity. So thank you very much for joining us today. I know we don't have a lot of extra time and I ended up going over the 45 minutes, but love to hear if there are any questions from the audience. I'm happy to answer those.
You were worth the extra time. So yes, anyone who has any other questions or any last minute thoughts, feel free to put in the questions box and we will hopefully get those answered before our time is over. Several questions have been, will this presentation be shared? Yes, it will. And I will give you that information in just a little bit. One question just came in through is how to join an existing conversation going on.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know somebody mentioned that earlier. Honestly, I just end up rolling up to the interaction and I just kind of stand there and I see if there's a moment for me to kind of insert myself in the conversation, but people are actually really way more okay with people coming up and like usually joining the conversation. Maybe their conversation is like losing some energy and so a new person coming in might actually like add something new to the conversation or the ways in which the conversation is evolving. So I know it might feel awkward to kind of stand there for a few moments and kind of wait for the right moment to interject yourself. But I come and I listen and I like hear what they're saying and I might ask a question or jump in and I kind of just take this. I'm like, I assume that I am wanted in every conversation. It's just like it's a mantra. It's again about this like self-talk that helps you kind of get more confident and realize like I'm a gift and I have a lot to contribute to any one of these interactions and I'm not going to shy away from, kind of inserting myself in conversations.
Great. One more question is, do you think there are gender differences in approach?
That's a good question. Certainly I live in Seattle and we're very sensitive about gender, like maybe assumptions about certain genders being one way or the other. I definitely think, there are ways in which there's evidence, right, that women struggle maybe more with confidence at times and are more kind of gravitate towards a listening role and maybe the males who would attend are maybe more comfortable talking about themselves. But that's kind of a pretty big generalization. But I think maybe what I would I don't know, this is the direction I'm going to go with that question. Whatever your natural mode is, this is something I challenge myself to do. I do tend to be the one who likes to listen and not share about myself as much. And so sometimes I just need to challenge myself to actually try and contribute more and actually share more about something that I'm interested in or my own ideas. And I challenge you, if you're the person who tends to want to be the one who talks more, like how can you possibly play with trying to listen more and trying to maybe bring more curiosity and be the one who's more asking the questions to draw other people out. So I don't know if that answers that question, but yeah, that's my thoughts.
I agree. I think that was great. Well, we didn't have any more questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up so that we can finish on this hour. Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing these wise words today. I certainly took a lot, and I'm looking forward to Thursday. You've helped us prepare for this networking night. And a big thank you to all of our attendees for joining us, but also participating. I think it was really helpful for us all to see that we're all dealing with the same things and have the same wonders and questions about networking. So I just want to encourage you all to sign up for networking night if you have not. You can find the information on vuconnect.com/networking night. We have these events in over 40 cities all over the world. So I think it'll be a really fun night. And the great thing is you already have one thing in common, which is Vanderbilt. Not to say that you have to talk about Vanderbilt the entire time, but it is really neat to see this community come together and talk about the experiences you had while you were in school, whether those are all different or the same. Make sure that you share how you're preparing for networking night and your attendance there on Thursday on social media. You may even win an Alumni Association tumbler. And make sure to check out all career resources, both electronic and in person, provided to you by the Vanderbilt Alumni Association. Later this week, I will send a follow-up email with this archived link, presentation, and a request for feedback. And be on the lookout for our next webinar with Hallie Crawford on November 14th. She will go over branding. We are always looking to improve upon our offerings to alumni, so please be in touch and let us know how we can best support you. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope to see you Thursday night.
Thanks so much, Sarah Whitney.